Welcome back to Recruiting Blitz. As always, I'm Tim Verghese. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Before we get started, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel. If you're listening on audio, appreciate you if you guys could subscribe to wherever you find your podcast. We're everywhere. If you don't see it on Spotify, I know we've had some issues with Spotify recently. So if you don't see it there, or if you haven't seen it recently, just reach out to me over Twitter. I'm at Tim Verghese on Twitter, as most of you know. It's probably the best way to reach out to me and the most effective way to get the podcast into your hands. Not my ideal setup or not my typical setup today. We're in the midst of a move. I'm in the midst of a move, and so just shooting this on my laptop, shooting it with my AirPods, no mic, no desk, no traditional setup. But that's coming back very soon. So appreciate you guys tuning in regardless. This week, I want to keep it short, but do want to touch on some important things. Nebraska's 27 quarterback pictures coming into focus this spring. Wanted to touch on the names at the top of the board, who you need to know, how fast this whole 27 quarterback search could get done, and also wanted to touch on some new visits we've added to the visitor list as kind of Nebraska's lining up visits for the spring as we get deeper into March and spring ball gets started and into April. Nebraska's going to have visitors practically every day, if not, for sure at least every weekend leading up to the spring, the spring game. If you're listening on audio, it's quote unquote spring game. It's going to be a spring, kind of festivities day, I guess is the best way to put it. Celebration of athletics, however you want to call it. And then we also added a new official visitor to the list. So we'll touch on all of that here down the stretch. But first, diving into this 2027 quarterback picture, the top target, of course, is Trey Taylor. He's the top 15 prospect, regardless of position per rivals, the number four quarterback in the country, out of Illinois in the suburbs of Chicago. Uber talented quarterback, larger than his frame, like a lean, tall quarterback, kind of draw some comps to Jaden Daniels just in terms of his frame and what he's able to do. Not as dynamic on the ground as Daniels is, but has some of that same stuff, as a quarterback. And so that's, I guess, the best way to comp him, best way to talk about him and get the conversation started on him. He visited twice in the fall. He visited first for the Rutgers game and didn't really see an offensive output there. That was a close, tight-knit game where Nebraska's offense struggled, Rutgers' offense struggled. But he was so he liked that visit so much. He was so enthralled by the coaching staff and the facilities and everything Nebraska had to offer. He canceled another visit elsewhere and returned in November to see Nebraska beat Wisconsin. A much better offensive output. Got to meet Dana Holgerson. That relationship's been budding ever since. Those two really get along. And just in general, Glenn Thomas obviously been working here. EJ Bartel done some good work. He is the guy in Illinois, and so Nebraska's legitimately in that mix. He recently announced a group of top schools. He's planning to make a decision in June. And as of now, I think Nebraska's well positioned to get that. They're actually set to get him on campus here at the end of the month, March 27th, which will be an important visit for him. He's a guy that, is planning to see all these remaining schools in the mix for him in the coming weeks before making what he's expecting is going to be a summer decision. But on that note, that summer decision is up in the air. 27 quarterback, the dominoes are falling quicker than usual, and he's trying to get this process over with and get a spot locked in so he can start peer recruiting. But recently we've seen Alabama enter the mix. Georgia's, increased their pursuit. Auburn's in the mix. And so those three SEC schools have really made an impression. A&M has stayed in the mix as well. The SEC is calling him. LSU has long been seen as a favorite here. I think the biggest threat to Nebraska currently is actually LSU. And so you look at this quarterback board, you look at him, and you look at kind of how he's managing things. Nebraska doesn't have all their eggs in one basket because, like I said, I think they're well positioned. They're going to get him on campus here at the end of the month. I think the offense, I think the opportunity to stay in the Midwest, the opportunity to play in a wide open offense that can develop him for the NFL and also allow him to, kind of put up stats is something that is attractive to him. But there's the education element of it. You've got Notre Dame in the mix. He's got Michigan in the mix. I don't think Michigan is as big of a threat as Notre Dame right now. And then you've got the draw of the SEC. I think that's something that's big for him right now is the opportunity to play in the SEC and play at Alabama, at Auburn, in Kyle Field at Texas A&M. I think all of that is very attractive to him. So again, I kind of framed it on over at Inside Nebraska this way. I think, if he's going to stay in the Midwest, I think Nebraska's the school to beat. But I think the draw of the SEC is very real. And so this is an evolving. I don't think he's ready to make a decision just yet. Um, but I do think Nebraska's well positioned and they need to close here in the coming weeks if they want to land Taylor. Again, like I said, that's not to say they're without options. Nebraska just recently added a top quarterback to the visitor list, Keegan Croucher. He's the number 15 quarterback in the country, a four-star prospect per Rivals. He's set to visit March 29th, just a few days after Taylor, typical on that same weekend essentially. And he's excited to see Nebraska for the first time. He hails out of the Northeast, the New England area. So the Nebraska has some ties up there. They're pretty familiar with recruiting that area, pretty familiar with the coaching staffs, and the people you need to know, the trainers, the coaching staffs, everyone you need to know in the Northeast. The staff is pretty familiar with. Croucher doesn't currently have a Nebraska offer. That could change depending on what happens with Taylor that weekend and what happens with Croucher that weekend. I could see Nebraska taking two quarterbacks at 27 regardless. So I don't think feeling confident in Taylor affects any other quarterback on the board at this point because I think Nebraska has the opportunity to potentially take two quarterbacks in 2027. So get familiar with Croucher. That's a guy who we're throwing on the film, getting familiar with who he is, what he brings to the table, why Nebraska is interested in him. I think that's a guy that we're going to be talking about a little bit more, especially once it makes it up to campus for the very first time. Nebraska's also in on Jamison Purcell, four-star quarterback, also out of Illinois. We consider him here at Rivals. We consider him the number 9 quarterback in the country. He visited twice in 2024. He visited in June, camped in front of the staff, and earned an offer. And then he returned in the season to go come see a game. And so he's a guy that is blowing up a little bit on the trail. Obviously, top 10 quarterback in the country, has North Carolina in the mix, has some top SEC programs in the mix. He's taking his time with the process. Again, all of these guys we're talking about, Croucher, Purcell, I think their timeline is a lot longer than Taylor's is. Taylor has been doing this recruiting process for a while. Nebraska was actually somewhat late to Taylor in comparison to some of the other schools like Notre Dame, like Georgia, like LSU, who've been in that mix for a while. But Nebraska entered in the fall and quickly ascended pretty high up his list. And so that's the order right now. It's Taylor at the top, Croucher, Purcell right in that next tier. I think Nebraska's still kind of figuring out the dominoes behind that. But I also wanted to touch before we close the 27 quarterback conversation. Touch on Braylon Warren, the 27 quarterback out of Omaha West Side, son of Steve Warren, who runs Warren Academy up in Omaha, played at Nebraska, played in the NFL. The that I mean, I think there's legit mutual interest, of course. Nebraska legacy right in the area. He'd love to play at Nebraska. But Nebraska kind of has an interesting. I don't know how to put this, but interesting decision ahead, I guess is the best way to put it. Warren is starting to blow up. Picked up two SEC offers recently, landed an offer from Missouri, landed an offer from Arkansas. Has other offers in the mix. Has programs like Notre Dame, Iowa, Iowa State looking at him. Has some national powers monitoring pretty closely. I think he's going to make some visits here in the spring and into the summer. And you're going to be surprised where his offer list. I think some of y'all are going to be surprised at where his offer list stands heading into his junior season after this summer tour he's got ahead. He's a guy that I think the world of. I saw him a ton in the fall. I think he's one of the top 27 quarterbacks. I think he's the top 27 quarterback in the state for sure, but I think he's one of the top 27 quarterbacks in the country. Just looking at his potential, what he's able to do with the ball, and he's a guy that's been trained to do this. He's been doing this for a long time. I love the way he carries himself on and off the field. Really, really pays attention to the details. Technically sound quarterback. Especially good on the run, does a really good job when the pocket breaks down, does a good job of maintaining his feet under him, maintaining his balance, throwing with decisiveness downfield. And he can even run a little bit. We kind of saw that from him as a sophomore. Not just, being able to create extra yards for himself, but really, like lowering his shoulder and grinding out some tough runs. I think the physicality element was something we hadn't seen from him. And it was really good to see that in season. And so I think he's a legitimate quarterback option for Nebraska. But if slash when Nebraska offers is the question at this point. Do they wait? Do they offer here in the spring, get him on campus for a visit and try and offer, or do they wait till the summer, try and get him out to camp, have him camp in front of Glenn Thomas and Dana Holgerson, and wait for that opportunity to potentially offer? That's something I think the staff is going to have to figure out, because I think Braylon Warren's a guy that, again, like I said, I think they have an option to take two quarterbacks in 2027, and Warren's a guy in state I don't think you can ignore. Right now, you look at the 26th picture and the quarterback picture, they got Dayton Raiola committed, but you have an in-state quarterback in Jet Tamala, who's on the rise, and Nebraska seems comfortable. Both side parties seem like they're just moving on and looking at other options. Guatemala has Iowa State, Missouri in the mix, could add a couple more offers here in the coming months. And Nebraska obviously has Dayton Raiola committed and took a transfer quarterback in Marcus Davila last cycle that is going to have a couple years of eligibility. So I think that's going to prevent them from taking multiple quarterbacks at 26 and ultimately going to lead to Jet Paula going out of the state for his next stage of his career. Um, and just kind of touching on the 27 quarterback picture, we'll have more on that in the coming weeks once Taylor makes it to campus, when Croucher makes it to campus. I think that the picture and where things stand is going to come a little better into focus in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for all of that. We'll have interviews and coverage with those guys as they make it to campus in the coming weeks. So stay tuned to Inside Nebraska for all that. Just speaking of visits, we added a new 2076 official visitor to the list. Moses Sparks, three-star offensive lineman out of New Mexico, is excited to get up to campus on June 13th for his official visit. Sparks is somewhat of an unknown coming out of New Mexico, but you like the athleticism. You look at the tape, you look at the some of the athletic testing he's done. You like the body of work so far. He's a kind of a fringe guy that I think is a legit P4 prospect and a guy that I think will obviously need some development adjusting from playing New Mexico competition up to the Big Ten. But a legit option for Nebraska as they kind of build out this offensive line board. Speaking of which, we're going to have an offensive line board breakdown over at Inside Nebraska this week. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll have the top targets. This board's changed a whole lot over the last couple of months. Jackson Cantwell no longer a realistic target for Nebraska, but they've got plenty of options at offensive tackle, plenty of options along the interior, and they have an opportunity to create or to put together a really good offensive line class if they land a couple of these top guys they're in on. But you also can't ignore the bottom. You know, you have to build out a board that is deep and a board that you have guys like Sparks. If the bottom of your board or the if you go down your board and a guy like Sparks, a high floor and high ceiling type prospect, who you spend some time developing and can develop him into kind of an elite type offensive lineman. That's the lower end of your board. You're doing pretty good. I think Donovan Raiola has done a pretty good job building out this 26 board. Of course, all of this doesn't matter. You can build out a board. He's done a good job building out boards in the past, but it's about how you close. And Nebraska's been in on some elite offensive linemen here in the 26th cycle. And if you can't close, if he can't close, I mean, it doesn't matter the type of board you build. It's. I'm interested to see kind of what happens here with Nebraska and this offensive line board. Obviously, we'll have more discussion on that at InsideNebraska.com this week. So stay tuned for that. While we're touching on offensive linemen, another visitor we added to the list, 2027 four-star offensive lineman Cameron Wagner, is visiting next month. He's listed to visit April 12th. Wagner's a guy that visited in the fall. Is pretty familiar with Nebraska, has a lot of Big Ten programs and Notre Dame, of course, in the mix, hailing from the Midwest. Another Illinois guy Nebraska really likes. And you look ahead to 2027, Illinois is going to be an area of emphasis for the staff. I think that's going to be a state where you're going to, specifically the Chicagoland area, is going to be an area where you see Nebraska really make an effort here in this next cycle. We also added 2027 edge rusher Caden McCarthy to the list, edge rusher out of Houston, Texas. Currently unranked or a three-star per Rivals, but a guy that I think is going to be rising as he gets more tape out there, as schools get out to see him. Really like his frame, really like some of the burst he has off the edge. More of a jack, I think, at this point than he is a true defensive end, but he's a guy that's excited to get up to campus, has an offer from Nebraska, and has maintained some dialogue with the staff for some time. He had started his high school career at Cy Ridge down in Texas, now plays at Cy Fall, but at Cy Ridge, where he was coached by Andrew Shanley, brother of Scott Shanley, former Nebraska player, both former Nebraska players. So there's some ties there. He's familiar with the tradition at Nebraska, familiar with the program. And also wanted to add 2028 athlete Barron Marshall to the visitor list. He's set to visit April 27th. Marshall is one of the top 2028 prospects already in the state of Missouri. For sure, one of the top prospects out of Kansas City in the 2027 cycle or 2028 cycle. Nebraska's already in the mix. They've already had him on campus. I think they're going to be a contender here till the end. But SEC schools are already in that mix as well. He's a guy that is going to be a national recruitment when it's all said and done. I know it's tough to think about 2028 here and 2025. We're still in March 2025, but that cycle is coming into focus pretty quick. You're going to see some 2028 offers go out this summer. You're going to see that board start to expand. And then obviously 27, you're going to see that board really come into focus here in the summer as well. So it's an interesting time. It's a big stretch of visits ahead. This time next week, with next week's episode, we're going to have our first big visit preview for the weekend as Nebraska gets started with spring ball and gets guys on campus. It's going to be an exciting time. It's going to be fast paced. You're going to see on top of recruiting visits, you're going to see some transfer portal news because the portal is going to open in April in the middle of Nebraska spring ball. So you're going to see some movement there, both in and out of the program. Nebraska still has to get down to that 105 mark. They're also still looking for any talent that would make some sense to potentially add to the roster. Spots are limited, of course, but if you find somebody you can add to the roster, I mean, this staff has never said no to adding talent, so they're going to get creative. They're going to figure out ways to add talent to this roster. So all that to say, stay tuned to InsideNebraska.com. Stay tuned to the YouTube channel and stay tuned to the Insiders Board for a ton of intel over the coming weeks as we get started with spring ball. I know it's not true football, and I know we're all kind of missing true football, but it's a little taste of what's to come in the fall. And spring ball is always fun beyond the obviously the recruiting side of it, just getting into the football side of it as well. It'll be fun to dive into that with Steve. We'll have some YouTube content as well for that, and excited to get started back in Lincoln pretty consistently for press conferences, media availability, and hopefully some open practices as well. We appreciate you guys tuning in. That'll probably do it for us here at Inside Nebraska with the Recruiting Blitz. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We'll be back with another episode next week.